And it's comfortable.
Easy flush.
Yeah. And nice gravel. Not too aggressive.
He's, I gotta say, if he presser he did in the 48, I remember Trudeau when he's got that
Have you played polo?
No, I never have.
When I first moved here, I used to hang out with the polo pro. Like, there's a cross between the fixture, fixture guys.
Preston's reading the over the
sports on don't wear one. I don't polish.
Oh, yeah.
I was guessing
Minutes? 1 minute? Sure.
Definitely not set up the polo. Like a 48-16. And it's hard to stop and go fast from standstill.
Are the names in the release?
Yes.
Thanks.
In the room, but
Your iCloud storage is full.
I like a shared family account on our iCloud, and our mom just kept clogging it up with shit. Like pictures.
Yeah.
Like, Mom, I'm taking you off until you empty it.
Until you figure out how to manage your
Yeah.
device.
No, she's just off.
So my dad will not listen to me. I'm like, you have to look at his phone to answer the calls if you need to know how to answer. You can't answer them.
Yeah.
heads up.
Oh, there.
Good afternoon. My name is Tyler Fulton. I'm a beef producer from Bertle, Manitoba, and currently serve as the president of the Canadian Cattle Association. The Canadian beef sector employs 350,000 people and contributes over $41 billion to the Canadian economy annually. Today, I'm here to ask the Government of Canada to stand up for Canadian beef producers and ranchers that feed millions of people at home and abroad, and ensure Canadian beef is not a bargaining chip in the quickly moving negotiations with Mercosur. I'll give three main reasons. First, Canada is one of the most exposed countries to beef imports in the world. Let me be clear. Our concern with a Mercosur free trade negotiation is not about protectionism, but overexposure. Beef imports make up 30% of Canadian beef consumption, compared to that of other exporting nations. In the United States, imports make up 19%. In the European Union, 7%. In Australia, 3%. And only 1% in Mercosur countries. Our industry has gone through significant challenges over the last few years, including drought, higher costs, and market disruptions. These challenges have resulted in a contraction of the national herd. But I'm encouraged that the Canadian beef sector is starting to see positive signs of growing the herd, which benefits our sector and the Canadian economy, and ultimately will increase the supply of Canadian beef and assist with affordability. Our industry is not afraid of competition. We already import from many other like-minded partners like Australia, New Zealand, and the US that have similar standards and production systems to Canada. However, If our market is flooded with cheap imports, it will send a negative signal to the next generation of ranchers that says there's no opportunity here. That will prevent our sector from rebuilding the herd in Canada. This means less Canadian beef available for Canadian consumers and less contribution to rural communities and our nation's economic growth. Our government says they want more economic growth in Canada to buy Canadian. But a deal with Mercosur that includes beef access sends the opposite signal. Second, our industry agrees with the government's trade-focused agenda. However, trade diversification needs to be strategic. Trade diversification only helps Canadians if we diversify exports, not if we simply welcome more imports from countries that are not competing on a level playing field. It's not clear to us what Canadian industries would benefit from such a hasty agreement with Mercosur. For trade to work, it needs to be reciprocal and fair. But with Mercosur, it's neither. Mercosur beef is cheaper because they have lower standards in animal health, labor, food safety, and sustainability. If we want Canada to increase our food security, as was outlined in the spring economic update, we cannot undermine Canadian beef producers. A deal with Mercosur that includes beef access makes Canada more dependent on beef imports and hurts food security at home and abroad. Beef producers can't continue producing beef at home and exporting it around the world if our domestic market is undercut by Mercosur countries. Third, a deal with Mercosur risks our most important trading relationship. Prime Minister Carney is asking Canadians to be patient as we work to renew CUSMA and get the best deal for Canada. Yet the government is rushing to finalize a deal with Mercosur, which has plenty of risk attached. Our most important trading relationship is with the USA, where 70% of Canadian beef exports are directed. We can diversify, however, we should not diminish the importance of the USA. The North American beef sector is highly integrated in its supply chain. U.S. industry has flagged their concerns with Mercosur beef in the U.S. and in Canada. And on the eve of the CUSMA review, we do not need to add irritants. It's simply not worth the risk. To conclude, we are ready to work with government to find a solution, but we need a tangible commitment that they will stand up for beef producers. Our recent experience has been of bad deals like the UK and CETA, where there is no reciprocity. These markets get to import their beef into Canada while creating barriers for us to export our beef there. Our world may be changing, but what doesn't change is our need to be strategic about trade and not to diversify for the sake of diversifying. Canadian beef is not a bargaining chip, and we need our government to stand up for our sector. Thank you for your time today. I'll now pass the podium over to my colleagues at the National Cattle Feeders Association.
Good afternoon. My name is Cathy Joe Noble, and I'm Vice President of the National Cattle Feeders Association. I'm joined here with my sector colleagues today to reinforce the beef sector's opposition to Canada negotiating beef access in the Mercosur trade deal. Canada's cattle feeders support global trade that is science-based, transparent, sustainable, and responsible. Our sector is working to grow and compete within an ever-evolving world. This includes changes in geopolitics, global trade, costs, and risks. So we call upon the government to work beside us to harness the opportunities and address the challenges of this global changing landscape. Feedlots provide significant economic benefit to communities across Canada while making large-scale contributions to food security at home and around the globe. We recognize that the Government of Canada is moving quickly with Mercosur negotiations, and we urge them to ensure the outcome does not have a negative impact on Canadian producers or consumers, including beef access within Mercosur trade deal would result in increased imports of low-quality beef raised with lower standards for animal health, labor, food safety, and the environment. Primarily, cattle feeders have ongoing concerns regarding the foot and mouth disease history, BSC reporting transparency, and the sanitary and phytosanitary compliance in parts of the Mercosur region. Protecting animal health is foundational to Canada's beef industry and must remain an absolute priority in trade policy. A foreign disease outbreak would have catastrophic impacts on the livelihood of cattle feeders, ranchers, and the economy of rural Canada. NCFA shares a priority of global trade diversification. However, we call upon our negotiators only to make deals that are responsible deals for Canadian farmers, deals that protect the health of our national herd and thus protect the access to other export markets. Canadian agriculture has the ability to propel the economy forward in partnership with the government, and we call upon the government to stand up for Canadian ranchers and farmers and say no to Mercosur beef access. Canadian beef must not be a bargaining chip. I'm now going to pass it over to the beef farmers of Ontario.
Thank you, CJ. Good morning, and thank you for being here. My name is Jason Leblond. I'm a beef producer from Chisholm Township, which is just south of North Bay, Ontario. I'm the current president and chair of Beef Farmers of Ontario. Today, I'm speaking on behalf of Ontario's 19,000 beef farmers, those families who care deeply about the land, their animals, and the food they produce for Canadians. Right now, those families are watching this Mercosur trade negotiations with growing concern. Because of what's at stake here isn't abstract policy, it's their livelihoods, their future, and the stability of our domestic food system. Let me be clear, expanding the market access for beef in the Mercosur deal would have immediate and disproportionate consequences right here in Ontario. The vast majority of imported beef coming into Canada lands right here in central Canada, most specifically Ontario. That means any increase in imports doesn't get spread evenly across the country. It hits Ontario farmers first, and it hits them hardest. And what we're talking about is beef from some of the largest, lowest cost producers in the world, where production costs can be dramatically lower, and where standards do not always align with the high expectations Canadians have for food safety and animal care and environmental stewardship that they recognize in our producers. We are not competing on a level playing field. We are competing against systems that can produce beef at a fraction of the cost, beef that would enter our market in significant volumes, undercutting the value of Canadian product and putting downward pressure on prices at the farm gate. Here's the reality. Canada already relies heavily on imported beef. About 30% of what we consume in Ontario. Imports typically exceed the 40% of our gross consumption. So this isn't about filling a gap. It's certainly not about lowering prices for consumers. Canada saw record levels of imports in 2025, yet retail prices remained the same. It's about displacing Canadian production with poorer quality beef from South America. It's about undermining Canadian producers. We all support trade, but trade must be fair, and it must not come at the expense of sectors that stand to lose the most. So today, we're calling on the federal government to take a clear and principled position. Reject any additional market access for beef in this Mercosur negotiation. Stand with Canadian farmers. Don't use our sector as a bargaining chip. N'utilisez pas notre secteur comme une monnaie d'échange. Prioritize the long-term sustainability of our domestic food system. because once we lose that capacity, it's not something we can easily rebuild. Thank you, and I'll pass it to mon ami Jean-François Gaudette.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Jean-François Gaudette. Je suis producteur bovin au Québec, sur la rive sud. Je siège au conseil d'administration des producteurs bovins du Québec en tant que représentant pour la Montérégie-Est. Je suis ici aujourd'hui pour demander au gouvernement du Canada de défendre les intérêts des éleveurs de bovins canadiens qui nourrissent des millions de personnes au pays ainsi qu'à l'étranger et de veiller à ce que le bœuf canadien ne soit pas utilisé comme monnaie d'échange dans les négociations qui avancent à grands pas avec le Mercosur. Je vais vous donner 3 raisons principales. Tout d'abord, le Canada est l'un des marchés les plus exposés aux importations de bœuf au monde. Premièrement, les Canadian Cattle Association, les producteurs bovins du Canadien, on n'est pas contre, que ce soit clair, notre inquiétude concernant les négociations sur l'accord de libre-échange avec le Mercosur ne porte pas sur le protectionnisme, mais sur une exposition excessive de notre marché. Le Canada est l'un des marchés les plus exposés aux importations de bœuf au monde. La part d'importation du marché canadien s'élève à 30 %. Nos compétiteurs, comparativement aux États-Unis, qui sont à 19 %, l'Union européenne se situe à 7 %, l'Australie à 3 % et la part du Mercosur s'élève seulement à 1 %. Notre secteur fait face à des défis de taille ces dernières années, notamment les sécheresses, la hausse des coûts, les perturbations du marché. Ces difficultés ont entraîné une diminution du cheptel national et nous avons dû augmenter nos importations de bœuf pour répondre à la demande des consommateurs. Je trouve encourageant de constater que le secteur canadien du bœuf commence à percevoir des signes positifs indiquant une augmentation du cheptel, ce qui profite à notre secteur ainsi qu'à l'économie canadienne. Notre industrie ne craint pas la concurrence. Nous importons déjà du bœuf de nombreux partenaires qui ont les mêmes valeurs que nous, les Canadiens, soit l'Australie, la Nouvelle-Zélande et les États-Unis. Cependant, notre marché est inondé d'importations à bas prix. Cela enverra un signal négatif qui nous empêchera de reconstituer notre cheptel. Cela signifie qu'il y aura moins de bœuf canadien disponible pour les Canadiens. Notre gouvernement affirme vouloir stimuler la croissance économique au Canada et encourager les achats des produits canadiens. Mais un accord avec le Mercosur prévoyant l'accès au marché du bœuf envoie un signal contraire à nous, les producteurs canadiens. Deuxièmement, notre industrie approuve le programme commercial du gouvernement. Toutefois, la diversification commerciale doit être stratégique. La diversification des échanges commerciaux ne profite aux Canadiens que si nous diversifions nos exportations et non si nous nous contentons d'accueillir davantage d'importations. Pour que le commerce fonctionne, il doit être réciproque, équitable, mais avec le Mercosur, il n'est ni l'un ni l'autre. Les pays du Mercosur ne livrent pas concurrence à armes égales. Le bœuf du Mercosur est moins cher parce que ces pays ont des normes moins strictes en matière de santé animale, des normes moins strictes en termes des normes du travail, de salubrité des aliments, ainsi que la durabilité environnementale. Si nous voulons que le Canada renforce la sécurité de son approvisionnement alimentaire, comme il a été question lors de la dernière mise à jour économique du printemps, nous ne pouvons pas nuire aux producteurs de bovins canadiens. Un accord visant le bœuf avec le Mercosur rendrait le Canada plus dépendant des importations de bœuf et affaiblirait notre sécurité alimentaire au pays comme à l'étranger. Bon nombre des coupes de bœuf canadiennes que l'industrie exporte à l'étranger ne sont pas consommées sur le marché intérieur, mais contribuent à la sécurité alimentaire mondiale. Affaiblir notre capacité d'exportation nuira à des partenaires commerciaux clés tels que le Mexique, le Japon et la Corée du Sud. Nous sommes disposés à collaborer avec le gouvernement pour accroître nos exportations et diversifier nos marchés. Cependant, 50% du bœuf canadien, du bœuf produit par les éleveurs canadiens est consommé ici même, au Canada. Les producteurs canadiens ne peuvent continuer à produire du bœuf au pays, à l'exporter partout dans le monde si notre marché intérieur est confronté à des pratiques de prix inférieurs par les pays du Mercosur. Troisièmement, un accord avec le Mercosur met en péril notre relation commerciale la plus importante. Le premier ministre Carney demande aux Canadiens de faire preuve de patience pendant que nous travaillons au renouvellement de la CUM afin d'obtenir le meilleur accord pour le Canada. Pourtant, le gouvernement s'empresse de conclure un accord avec le Mercosur qui comporte de nombreux risques. Notre relation commerciale la plus importante est celle que nous entretenons avec les États-Unis. Nous pouvons diversifier nos partenariats, mais nous ne pouvons pas nous détacher des États-Unis. Le secteur du bœuf nord-américain présente une chaîne d'approvisionnement fortement intégrée. L'industrie américaine a fait part de ses inquiétudes concernant le bœuf du Mercosur aux États-Unis et au Canada. À la veille de la révision de la CUM, nous n'avons pas besoin d'ajouter de nouvelles sources de tension. Cela ne vaut tout simplement pas la peine de prendre ce risque. Pour conclure, nous sommes prêts à collaborer avec le gouvernement pour trouver une solution, mais nous avons besoin d'un engagement de sa part à défendre les intérêts des producteurs de bœuf canadiens. Ces derniers temps, nous avons connu des accords défavorables comme ceux conclus avec le Royaume-Uni et l'AECG, qui ne prévoient aucune réciprocité. Ces pays peuvent importer leur bœuf au Canada et tout en nous imposant des obstacles pour exporter le nôtre vers leur territoire. Notre monde évolue peut-être, mais ce qui ne change pas, c'est la nécessité d'adopter une approche stratégique en matière de commerce et de ne pas diversifier pour le simple plaisir de diversifier. Le bœuf canadien n'est pas une monnaie d'échange et nous avons besoin que notre gouvernement défende notre secteur. Merci de votre attention.
Good afternoon. My name is Adam Chambers. I am a member of Parliament for Simcoe North, but Conservative Party's shadow critic for international trade. I'm pleased to be joined here with a number of my colleagues from multiple provinces, but representing beef producers, and we are proud to be here along with our Bloc colleagues here today, who we'll hear from in a moment, and standing alongside our stakeholders and advocates for the beef and rancher industry here in Canada, our farmers that we're happy here to stand with today. Canadian beef is of incredibly high quality. Everyone knows this. What you're hearing today, not to relitigate or reframe all of what you've heard, but to make the point that the concerns that are being raised here today on behalf of the sector do not represent an aversion to competition or aversion to trade. What I think you're hearing is we want a level playing field for our ranchers and for our farmers to compete. You see that Canada already imports a significant amount of beef that we consume each year. The government has opportunities to increase our trade deals with other countries with whom we are trying to get our Canadian beef on the shelves today. So what we're questioning is the pace with which the government is choosing to act, the quickness that they are going to make some of these decisions. And we want to set a high expectation that the government is meeting the concerns and addressing the concerns that you've heard here today about the impacts on quality, food security, and ultimately on the size of the herd here in Canada. I think it's important for farmers, but for future generations, to look at an industry and know that there is opportunity. We have an ability in this country to support Canadian beef producers and Canadian agriculture. It's important for food security, it's important for health and safety, but it's important to give the next generation of farmers opportunity and hope to know that an industry will be there for them that is thriving and a government that stands behind that industry very strongly. And so the message we would like to leave you here today is that Conservatives will be, or have been watching this discussion unfold very closely. We are happy to have the great relationships we have with our stakeholders who have brought these concerns to us, and we have heard them across the country in areas in every single province where there are beef producers. We have heard the concerns that are being brought forward here today, and we hope that the government is going to listen and will hear these concerns and make sure that they're addressed in any upcoming trade deal should one be signed, and we will be watching very closely to hold them to that very high standard. Thank you, and I'd like to introduce Simon-Pierre Savard-Tremblay from the Bloc, and who will give brief remarks.
Merci Adam. Mon nom est Simon-Pierre Savard-Tremblay, je suis le député de Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagot-Acton, région de production et de transformation agroalimentaire, s'il en est une, de même que porte-parole du Bloc québécois, notamment en commerce international. Justement, on a étudié récemment dans notre comité, le comité du commerce international, on a étudié les perspectives d'un accord avec le Mercosur. Évidemment, il y a les producteurs de bovins qui nous ont fait part de craintes et d'inquiétudes, mais aussi plusieurs autres. Hein, les producteurs de poulet du Canada, les éleveurs de volailles, le Conseil canadien du porc, le Conseil des viandes du Canada, plusieurs groupes environnementaux. Bref, ils ne font pas cavalier seuls aujourd'hui. On va se garder aujourd'hui, bien sûr, de dire ce qu'on va faire quand on va avoir sous les yeux et de juger d'une entente qui n'est pas encore écrite et qui n'est pas encore publique. On va évidemment pas dire d'emblée ce qui se passe. Par contre, on juge que c'est important d'appuyer les mises en garde qui nous sont faites, qui viennent de gauche et de droite. L'idée de l'ouverture commerciale, du commerce international, on est pour à 100%, ça a contribué grandement à la modernisation économique du Québec, transformant notre économie en une économie d'exportation, puis le mouvement souverainiste a été à l'avant-plan de ça. Il est toujours, le Bloc québécois est ardemment favorable au commerce international. Mais par contre, notre rapport n'est pas religieux pour autant. Si une entente devait être mauvaise, si un accord devait être mauvais, il faudrait pointer ses aspects les plus négatifs et s'y opposer le cas échéant. Dans le cas de l'accord avec le Mercosur, on peut dire, puis je réitère que nous aussi, on est pour la diversification des marchés, on le dit à toutes les reprises, mais le cas du Mercosur, on ne peut pas dire que c'est la principale urgence non plus, et qu'elle soulève beaucoup de craintes aussi. Certainement des espoirs, mais beaucoup de craintes. Le Mercosur offre peu d'opportunités, selon ce qu'on en sait, pour les secteurs agricoles, en raison de la forte compétitivité des pays comme le Brésil, qui est un grand exportateur, dans des normes qui vous ont été expliquées beaucoup mieux que je pourrais le faire par ceux et celles qui le vivent au quotidien, à savoir les producteurs ici présents. Les gains seraient limités, voire inexistants, et toute ouverture doit bien sûr être encadrée. Qui plus est, la production bovine brésilienne, en plus d'avoir des normes environnementales qui ne sont pas les mêmes, donc celle qui viendrait concurrencer la nôtre de manière assez brutale, dans des conditions qui ne sont pas du tout les mêmes, elle est réputée liée à la déforestation. Il y a des études qui ont été faites. Comme on le sait, la forêt amazonienne, c'est le poumon de la planète. Ça a une extrême importance. Ça rend notre air qui est plus respirable. Ça rend notre air plus respirable. Ça contribue à préserver le climat en emmagasinant le carbone dans ces milliards d'arbres. Or, l'Amazonie, c'est traversée par des féroces incendies depuis très longtemps qui menacent les peuples autochtones qui y habitent et aussi plusieurs formes de vie animale et végétale. Or, une étude de 2020 a montré que la majorité des incendies survenus dans la région amazonienne étaient liés à la présence d'industries agroalimentaires, principalement l'élevage bovin, et dans des terres ciblées par de potentiels acheteurs. Le Mercosur, donc, souhaite exporter chez nous une viande qui est produite dans des conditions qui pourraient se retrouver être écocides dans certains cas, et un éventuel accord risque d'en assurer une présence importante dans nos épiceries. Donc, nous, les conditions sont claires, on veut des négociations qui sont transparentes, on veut la protection de nos secteurs agricoles et une explication claire aussi de la part d'Ottawa sur la façon dont il compte s'assurer qu'un accord de libre-échange ne va pas accentuer la déforestation. Donc, nos conditions sont claires. Merci.
Merci. We'll now take questions. Nous allons maintenant prendre des questions.
My name's Hunter. I'm with the Lobby Monitor, and I have a few questions for some of you, if I may. Mr. Fulton, do you have an estimated dollar impact on what the Mercosur agreement could cost the Canadian beef industry?
No, we don't, because we don't have details exactly on what is on the table, which is concerning given that there's a target to complete negotiations within weeks. So we have done some work to understand what the threat is, but it really is contingent on the degree to which access is provided. Given that last year, Mercosur countries exported about 40,000 metric tons to Canada, and that a 26.5% tariff was paid on 70% on 70% of that volume. We have grave concerns over really any additional access being provided, given that it seems to be not a deterrent currently with the current tariff rate.
And you mentioned that these negotiations are rushed, but they've been ongoing for years. So what makes them so rushed?
Well, it was my understanding is that they may have started 4 or 5 years ago, but for much of that time they were paused. And when they were resumed, quite simply, there was a timeline that was measured in weeks and months, as opposed to years, as we saw previously. It seems hasty, the speed with which they're moving.
And my final question for you would be about you and others up here have mentioned how trade exposed the Canadian beef sector is. Why is that?
Because currently we import about 30% of domestically consumed beef. So in relation to some of those other countries, those other exporting nations, the U.S. imports approximately 19% of their domestically consumed beef, or Europe, 7%. So relative to other beef exporting nations, we are already at a threshold that is impacting the signals that domestic producers are receiving from the market, and we have concerns about additional access.
I'm sorry, I do have one more for you. How long have you guys been engaging federal officials on this issue, and how do you plan on keeping up your advocacy and moving it forward and actually impacting these negotiations?
Yeah, that action is going to unfold over the course of the next 4 to 5 weeks. We are very much focused on ensuring that the government understands our perspectives and the threat that it represents. We've been engaging on trade issues ongoing for honestly decades. This is a key component to our industry, our reliance on export markets, with 50% of what we produce in live cattle and beef destined for export markets. So we rely on it. But quite simply, it represents a new threat that is not a level playing field.
Okay, thank you.
Moi, j'aurais quelques questions en français.
Oui.
Votre collègue n'était pas capable de chiffrer là, les pertes que vous craignez subir là, monétairement, mais en part de marché, avez-vous une idée? Est-ce que ça voudrait dire?
On laisse déjà, comme il l'a répété, on laisse déjà 30% de notre marché qu'on laisse à l'importation. Donc,
si vous ajoutez les pays du Mercosur, est-ce que vous savez ce serait quoi les concessions que le gouvernement ferait?
Pour l'instant, l'accord on n'a pas pu lire l'accord, qu'est-ce qui allait être accordé, mais ce qu'on sait, c'est que les portions qu'ils peuvent utiliser en ce moment des accords précédents, c'est qu'ils remplissent déjà, au mois de février, ils ont déjà atteint leur quota. Donc, si on l'ouvrirait encore plus, ça ne ferait qu'augmenter les portions d'importation.
Mais si je comprends bien, le gouvernement ne vous informe pas là, de ce qui est en train de
Pas pour l'instant, c'est un peu pour ça
pour
on a des inquiétudes en ce moment, on soulève les points.
OK, donc il y a un manque de communication.
De leur part.
OK. Puis, ça a été expliqué, mais je me demandais, il n'y a pas d'espoir que vous pourriez avoir un accès équivalent au marché des pays du Mercosur aussi?
On offre un produit de qualité, mais ce qui est habitué d'être consommé par là-bas est un produit, c'est un prix. Et le bœuf canadien n'est pas un bœuf à rabais. On offre un produit de haute gamme. Donc, ça serait difficile pour nous d'aller compétitionner, surtout que les normes environnementales, les normes de travail, les normes de salubrité sont loin d'être les mêmes que nous. À moins qu'on décide d'abaisser nos propres normes au Canada, mais je crois que c'est pas l'avantage des Canadiens.
Merci.
I'm Catherine with the Canadian Press. I kind of touching on another question. I'm just wondering, have you had any specific communications with the federal government in recent weeks about this particular issue? And, I know you mentioned that you're not really sure what's on the bargaining table right now. So how do you know that, they're not already thinking about this issue?
Some transparency.
Yeah, I think we have been engaging at the ministerial level, and quite simply, we're not getting specific answers to our questions. We have a really good understanding as to what it represents in terms of a threat, and it's very difficult for us to plan and respond and advocate on behalf of our industry when we don't have transparency as to what's being discussed.
Are you getting any kind of indication that, a deal would include, beef at this time?
Yes, absolutely. There is an understanding that Mercosur countries really hold the beef access to Canada as the priority in that agreement.
And then I also you kind of touched that this is kind of looking like a one-sided deal. I'm wondering if there's any kind of trade barriers that could be removed for a Mercosur deal to be fair for Canadian producers?
Fundamentally, you can't change the reality that their standard is their standard. Their standard currently allows 1% of imports into those countries. So it really doesn't represent any kind of market opportunity or reciprocal market access. Our experiences with the UK and CETA in Europe have informed this position of ours, that when there's barriers and limitations, quite simply including beef in these larger agreements, tends to really sell the farm.
Thank you.
In previous commercial agreements, were you better informed during the process by the government?
I would say my understanding with CPTPP negotiations and especially with previous CUSMA and NAFTA negotiations in the decades past, yes, we were part of those as they happened. It's really the speed with which the government is moving that is concerning, and the lack of transparency that's concerning.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. This concludes the press conference. Merci. C'est ce que la presse a conférence de presse.
Thank you.
Good job.
Did you really? Okay. You say Boston?